Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. I'm Chuck Pollock, sports editor of the paper, and it's hard to believe, but come Friday of this weekend, Big 30 high school basketball is going to start. Meanwhile, the incubation period is well underway for both St. Bonaventure basketball teams, and so I have my usual suspects to talk about the teams they cover. On my right, Jeff Madigan, who covers the women's team, and on my left, J.P. Butler, who handles the men. We'll deal with the women first. Jeff, just a short way into the Bona women's season, and we've gotten a lot of mixed messages already.
Yeah,
they followed what I would call a bad loss, a home loss to Canisius, a game I'm sure you felt they would win.
Yeah, I do.
And then comes a game where you think they're going to get smoked. They go to Delaware and play really tough. You got to be confused just 4 games into the season.
You can't have any expectations about this team because once you expect them to be completely blown out, they come and surprise you like they did on Saturday with the 43-40 loss to Delaware. Now, yeah, it was a loss, but, I mean, and Jesse said it after the game, there's no moral victories, but that's for him to say because his team lost. I mean, we can look at it as, wow, they played great defense, especially allowing a pretty good Delaware team to just 43 points. Now, granted, their offense wasn't there and only scored 40, but that defensive effort is coming off of allowing 74 to Canisius at your place just 3 days before. It's quite a Jekyll and Hyde situation we've got early going.
It's interesting to me. Coaches are contractually obligated to say there are no moral victories.
Right.
And the Bona men had one last week, which I'm going to talk to JP about. But the thing that did stick out to me, and not in the short term, but maybe in the long term, was that this is a team that's going to have to survive by defense. And to play good defense on the road against a good team, I think that's encouraging.
Absolutely it is. And like I said, they're going to go on the road for their next 2 games as well against 2 pretty good opponents in Austin Peay and Ryder this weekend. And are they going to win both games? Probably not. It would be nice if they did to get themselves back at 500 before they come back here and get Stony Brook on the 30th. But yes, absolutely, defense is the name of the game, and that's what Coach Fleming wants his team to do, and they definitely showed signs of that on Saturday. I don't care if you allow 43 points in a game, I mean, chances are you're going to win. Now, granted, the offense wasn't there. I mean, they scored 5 points in the second quarter. They had 10 points at halftime, so it wasn't a pretty game by any stretch of the imagination, and the shots will fall. But if you can play defense as good as they did on Saturday with, in essence, 3 freshmen pretty much playing a lot of the game, that's certainly a promising sign of things to come.
One of the things that sticks out, as you're exactly right, hold a team to 43,
Right.
You expect you're going to win.
Yeah.
Where do you think the flaw is offensively where they've struggled in that area?
The shots aren't going down right now, and there's a little bit of a lack of depth as we've seen. Now, on Saturday, he did start 2 freshmen, and so he put senior Imani Outlaw and sophomore McKenna Maycock on the bench, and maybe the fact that they played better defensively was as a result of those 2 coming off of the bench and not having to do so much per se. But I mean, I don't know how the defense goes from allowing 74 to Canisius to 43 to Delaware. I mean, they must have had great practices on Thursday and Friday to do something, just going back to basics and seeing some of the same things we saw last year from the defense that was one of the top 20 or so in the country.
What does Jesse say about what he did with his personnel, putting 2 former starters on the bench to start? Was that just kind of to shake up the psyches, or?
It might have been. Maybe Sarah. I mean, Sarah was definitely playing better, Sarah Hart, and you noticed that as well. She's starting to score a little more, and her defense was there. And I think Imani was much better last year coming off the bench, and again, so was McKenna. So I think he might have wanted Jaleisha and Sarah to start early on, or they just weren't ready yet. And now that they've got some games under their belt, some experience there, now they're ready to get in that lineup. Plus, in this point, it now gives Fleming some experience coming off the bench instead of before when he just had 5 freshmen on the bench, 2 of which really don't play all that much.
One of the things that changed, and fairly recently, is the fact that you were supposed to have a game tomorrow night.
Yeah.
It's probably a good break. If you're going to lose a game, this is probably one to not have and maybe play it next year. But now with no Penn State game because of a conflict, they come back into action on Saturday, and they've got a pretty good test.
They do. Austin Peay and Ryder down in Central Florida. Now, I don't know what kind of fan bases Austin Peay and Ryder will bring, but the entire Matea Britvar family is in Orlando, where University of Central Florida is. So the Bonnies will have a pretty good contingent of people there, and they play Saturday at noon against Austin P, and then Sunday at noon against Rider. And Rider right now, as we're filming this, is undefeated, and Austin P is 3-1 with another game Tuesday night. But yeah, I mean, I would have liked to have gone to Penn State tomorrow, but I don't make those decisions. And Penn State beat Tennessee on Sunday. One of the top 10, 15 teams in the country. So they're coming off of a pretty good win, where the Bonnies are coming off, in essence, another bad loss, so to speak. Maybe not as bad as the Canisius loss, but it would have been a nice test to see what the Bonnies could do against a team that just beaten one of the top 15 teams in the country. But, they're going to get that extra break, Thanksgiving and all that, and they're going to be flying down to Florida on Thursday. I believe they'll get a nice dinner down there and then see what they do against Austin P and Rider.
The Bonner men have a kind of a congested schedule for the next couple of days, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. JP, we just talked about, Jeff and I did, about no such thing as moral victories, which we know from a fan standpoint is absolutely not true. There are moral victories. So before we look ahead with the Bonnies, let's take a look back, because the significance to me was the Bonnies' performance at Lakeland, Florida against an SEC team, Florida, very good team, and here they are. They end up losing by 7, but it's a 3-point game with a minute to play. It doesn't get any better than that for a team in Bonner's situation.
Yeah, I think you got to be pretty happy with the way that they played, especially coming in their second game of the season, when things are really still kind of up in the air for them right now. They're still, working on coming together right now. I think in the moment there were a lot of fans who maybe wanted to look at it as another opportunity that kind of got away, and so from that standpoint, you're a little bit disappointed, because we've seen this kind of game before, where in those non-conference games against the football-playing kind of power conference schools, they've had an opportunity to win so many of these games. I mean, we go back and talk about the Illinois and the NC States from a couple of years ago, Pitt 2 years ago, and even Syracuse last year, where they had that double-digit lead in the first half and were winning towards the end, and then just kind of gave away. So it's disappointing from a standpoint that there was that opportunity to get that big signature win early, and they didn't get that. But there really was no expectation, I think, from anybody, outside of that locker room, that they would win that game. They were 13-point underdog, 13.5-point underdogs. I can't remember the last time that they were that big of an underdog going into the game. On a neutral
court.
On a neutral Florida. So to go down there and to shake all of that off, they were down double digits twice in that game, once in the first half, and then in the second half they got down by 15 to overcome that and give themselves a chance to win, at the end. That was a tie game with a minute left to go, and Jalen Adams had the ball in his hands at the three-point line, and we saw last year how many times he hit that shot that, gave them some big wins. And so that's exactly what you wanted in that situation. And, he just misses. They come down again, down 2. Matt Mobley had a chance at a three-pointer that just misses. If either one of those games go down, we might be talking about a win here. But, again, just to be able to go down there early, to not be able to get much from your bench nor your big men, and still have a chance to knock off what at this point is basically a top 30 team pretty much on the road, even in a loss, that to me is, sets up well for them going forward. It bodes well, going forward here.
Eventually, it still is, I think, better to lose close, as they did it, rather than getting blasted by 30, because then you feel like you have no hope. But now you're talking about a circumstance late in that game where you're one good shot away from being tied, maybe going to overtime. And what's nice about that is the two guys you wanted to get shots at the end got them. They didn't go down by either one of them, but it kind of takes you back to last year when you had Jalen and Marcus. Now it's Jalen and Mobley. But to have two guys like that are a threat, that really maybe changes the dynamic.
Well, it's two guys that got the shots that you wanted, and it's two guys that played really well throughout the course of the game that Bona would have wanted, and that's in the backcourt with Adams and Mobley. This is a group that combined for 49 points in this game, and to me the biggest thing and maybe the best bright spot going forward from that game is what Mobley did. I mean, here's a guy, people had these big expectations for him to come in and be that big-time scorer, be able to replace Marcus Posley, which was going to be such a hard task, and already he's doing exactly that.
Right.
He had 21 in the first game. He had 28 against Florida, 19 in the second half. He made 6 of 12 from three-point range. He hit some huge shots in the second half to bring Bona back from that 15-point deficit, doing those things that Posley would have been doing. And now you're in a position here where you say, okay, last year they were as good as they were because they had the best backcourt in the Atlantic 10. And it's only 2 games into this season, but you're thinking, man, already they might be able to say, you know, they might have the best backcourt in the Atlantic 10 going forward if they keep this up. And if that's the case,
Right.
you know, they'll be able to win a lot of games again. So even in a loss, I think a really good sign that those two played as well as they did. Now they're going to have to get some more, you know, out of other guys going forward.
As viewers watch this, the Bonnies are going to be in a stretch where everything is congested. 3 games, 3 nights. Their depth will be tested, where the younger players are going to have to step up a bit. Their toughest game comes first, and by the time some people see it, that game might well be over. But this will be an interesting early test with the Bonnies at that Lone Star shootout in Austin, just to find out maybe where they are depth-wise.
Right. You're exactly right. And, you know, now here's also a scenario where, you know, okay, on Thursday night against Florida, you had a chance to go in and you know, play well against a top 30 team on the road. Tonight, in the first game of that 3-day Lone Star shootout, you've got an opportunity to prove that you can beat a team of Arkansas Little Rock's caliber. This is a team that went 30-5 last season, won both the Sun Belt regular season and tournament championships, made it to the NCAA tournament, beat Purdue in the first round, and brings most of their guys back from that team. They do lose 2 starters, but they have pretty much everybody else back. And so this is a team that is probably going to be pretty good again this year. They didn't play well on Friday night. They lost to Idaho, and they didn't shoot the ball particularly well. But still, I think that was maybe more just a bad night than anything. And so right off the bat in Austin, Texas, you've got a tough game, a game that can really help your RPI going forward, because I think Arkansas Little Rock's going to have a good RPI. And like you said, you know, a chance to really test this depth here going forward, because it's going to be 3 in a row. And, you know, we know that they're going to play, Bona's going to play their starters a ton. Guys like Adams and Mobley and Taki and Greg are all going to play probably 34, 35 plus minutes a night. But that's going to certainly take a toll, you know, by Wednesday. And so I think, you know, in this time, this is an opportunity for some of these younger guys off the bench to step up and start showing what they can do. They're going to need that going forward if they're going to continue to win. And primarily in the front court. We saw a great, you know, first half from Josh Ianni in that opener against St. Francis. He didn't do, you know, a whole lot against Florida. And all 3 big guys, Boko, the senior who's gotten off to a rough start, and Ianni and Ikpeazi, the other freshman, really didn't do much of anything, certainly from the offensive standpoint against Florida. These next 3 games are an opportunity for them to kind of shake that off and start, you know, getting a little bit better on that end.
It's not even a question about the quality of Bona's backcourt. We've known that. That's been a Bona history for years and years. You mentioned Denzel Gregg. You mentioned Taki. The other spot you didn't mention, and I think you didn't mention it because that seems to be the spot the Bonnies have got to fill, because it seems if this team is going to get better, that next step has got to be taken by the player or players who fill that spot capably.
Yeah, at the center spot, that number 5 spot. Now, you know, they did show last year that you don't have to have the greatest big man in the world to succeed, because they basically relied on the 2 freshmen last year, you know, Woods and Tyson, and they were able to get by and still have the season that they did. But you're going to have to be able to get a little bit more, certainly, than what they're getting now. especially when A10 play rolls around. I mean, Boko's a guy they brought in from Syracuse, and I think there was some excitement there because he was coming from the ACC and he was formerly a really highly recruited kid. And you think, okay, maybe coming down, a level to the A10, he can be, he'll be a player. And that really hasn't been the case so far. He's only played in 21 minutes over 2 games so far because he hasn't been able to stay out of foul trouble. He has 7 fouls in 21 minutes. He hasn't been on the floor, and that's not gonna be all right. And even when he has been on the floor, he hasn't really done much offensively, and he hasn't been kind of the presence they need protecting the rim because again, Florida scored a ton inside and got to the free throw line. So that's something that they're hoping that he can just kind of give them a little bit more. And then the 2 freshmen, Ieni and Ikpeazi, we knew that they, it was going to take some time for those 2 because they are only freshmen, and we did see, a bright spot with Ieni against St. Francis. But I think it's just going to be kind of, learning by fire, with those 2. And I do think that they'll give them a little something going forward. But between the 3 of them, certainly more, than Florida. They had, I think they combined for like 5 points and 4 rebounds and a ton of fouls, and that's something that has to be better, going forward.
You can read about the Bonnies' play in the Lone Star Shootout from J.P. Butler in the Times-Herald or online, and we'll be back next week with another edition of OTH Sports View.